Hello and welcome to our talk. I'm Luigi Talamo, and she's my co-author, and Mary Verkerk. Sorry, sometimes she disappears from the screen, but she's here.
I'm here.
Don't worry. Okay. Okay, one of the common problems in linguistic typology is strong data reduction, which stems from the use of employing binary or categorical classifications. So typologists tend to think in a binary way. We think that the general solution for this problem is the so-called token-based typology. We provide a case study of one particular solution using a parallel corpus and dependency grammar from the Universal Dependencies project in order to study variability in a nominal word order in a small sample of European languages. Okay. We are going to look, sorry, I have also to, okay. We are going to look at 7 Indo-European languages: Dutch, English, German, French, Italian, Spanish, and modern Greek, and at some of these well-known word order typology, which are neatly and nicely plotted on the screen. Let's start by looking at their classification in WALS Online. Here are 6 different binary word orders. For each occur 3 options in the dataset. Taking genitive and noun as an example, the options are noun-genitive, genitive-noun, or no-dominant order. As you can see, many of these have the same word orders, and of course, they are in part closely or remotely related languages, so this seems a clear, mostly uniform picture. However, and unfortunately, this nicely overview hides language internal variation. Of course, this is nothing new, but we like to illustrate anyway. First of all, we have a noun adjective, which is exemplified here with French adjectives. The basic position for attributive adjective in French is after the head noun, something like une voiture rouge, as in voiture rouge. However, frequently adjectives such as bon, mauvais, grand, vieux appear in front of the noun, so in the other position. Some adjectives are in free variation regarding their position, others are not. The Word Atlas of Language Structures classifies French as noun adjective and doesn't take into account the other word pattern. Then we have the noun genitive word order. We see how this word pattern behaves in Dutch. Again, according to Dutch, Dutch is a noun genitive word order, so the van genitive construction. Indeed, we find in Dutch the so-called noun comes first, so the van construction. However, we can also find other 2 constructions: the genitive, the S genitive, when the genitive is preceded, headed by the preposition. So we find another word structure, which is the genitive noun, which is instantiated by the S genitive. The third construction is the possessive pronoun genitive, which again has the genitive in front of the noun. Third, the famous English had position, in which, as we all know, English is a prepositional language, so we find that in English the preposition precedes the noun. However, there is at least one exception, ago, which is a true postposition. If I say 1 week ago, we find postposition after the noun. The WALS table we just discussed is an example of the type of strong data reduction that is common in typology, which is defined by Verkerk in a 2009 article as summarizing or grouping of data where information might be lost. This is the definition of data reduction. In the same paper, Verkerk also identifies a strong bimodal distribution bias. Typologists, intuitively or on purpose, prefer creating typologies with strong bimodal distribution, which can be easily reduced to a binary set of type. So we have 2 effects here. which are related. The solution is, yes, we can, how can we overcome the massive data reduction that is common in linguistic typology? I preempted the solution, and I probably account for language internal variation while also taking into account variation between languages. We turn to so-called token-based typology. This way of doing typology makes use of token-based comparative concepts, where for each stimuli or unit, we would have an utterance, a written sentence, or a set of sentences, which can be analyzed and later summarized using methods that do not cause maximal data reduction. Using distribution of tokens, we can come up with usage-based aggregate variables such as frequency, entropy, complexity, dependency length and depth, etc. These variables are continuous and reflect variation that we find within languages. And of course, we find also this variation between languages. Using a token-based approach, we avoid overall the use of large semantical defined comparative concept, point 3. For instance, we no longer define adjective using semantic subclasses of property concepts such as age, dimension, color, value, etc. What we get instead by using token-based typology is a bottom-up dense distribution of token-based comparative concept within conceptual space. Finally, the fourth point, the fourth pros of using token-based typology is that is even in line with diachronic typology, because according to Croft again, much synchronic variation represents language change in progress. So the research questions are, how much variability in a nominal word order do these languages display? Is the traditional bimodal classification of word order in these languages appropriate? What kind of minority patterns do we find that the bimodal classification does not capture? And more methodologically, can token-based typology work? For what kind of question can it work? What are the required conditions for it to work well? This is a sort of summary. You can see our back in the background, a nice picture of a sort of mix-up of the covers of the books we have used for building up our parallel corpus of Indo-European prose, which is aptly named KEEP. Of course, KEEP is maternity of Anne-Marie, because it's a really fancy name. And KEEP, we started KEEP in November 2019, so before the COVID pandemic. It currently features 18 books in the original version, and each book is translated into the 7 languages that we are presenting data on today. So this is a parallel corpus. Our ultimate goal is a phylogenetically balanced sample of 30 modern Indo-European languages representing 7 genera. KEEP will have in its various forms tokenization, lemmatization, sentence alignment between languages, and syntactic annotation, of course, from the universal dependencies.
Okay, we switch.
Yep.
To our methodology. In order to get information about word order patterns, we use parsers trained on tree banks from the Universal Dependency Project. And within this project, I mean, we've already heard about it in other talks, but people are developing cross-linguistically consistent tree banks for many languages. And the annotation includes parts of speech, morphosyntactic features, and syntactic relations. And the general philosophy is to provide a basic universal inventory of categories and consistent annotation of similar constructions across languages at different levels of linguistic structure, while also allowing language-specific extensions. So the example that you can read here is an example of a Spanish phrase where you can observe some of the ethnominal relationships that we are interested in. We will measure word order variability in terms of Shannon entropy. Anthropic measures of linguistic diversity have been proposed for various levels now. You can see some references of that on the left. And entropy is ultimately a measure of information content. And in this talk, we are interested in variability. So we may think of entropy as a measure of how much information is carried by the linguistic variability in the order of a particular head-dependent pair. So here we are calculating Shannon entropy on the basis of probability of occurrence of one word order as opposed to the other. If there is no variation, for instance, if we have a language like English with strictly prepositions and we don't have a go in our corpus, we would have an entropy of 0. If there is a proportion of noun phrases that also has noun postposition order in such a language, entropy increases to the maximum value of 1 if there's 50-50 prepositions and postpositions in our fake example. So the plot on the right is a first peek into our results. It's the entropy of adjective noun word order in French, which we already saw is very variable. Thus we see the entropy values are high. We have selected just various corpus sizes to show a little bit the impact of corpus size on entropy. So the implementation of our methodology concerns an assessment of how well the UD categories and relations actually match the comparative concepts that we use in typology. So we are concerned with part of speech tags to some extent, as we will make clear, but we don't investigate their soundness as such. We treat them mostly as given. Our focus is on the syntactic relations that, which have to do with adnominal modifiers within nominal phrases. And we will now explain in more detail how these are treated using syntactic relations in UD. So we basically contrast in each of these next slides our comparative concept for each of the adnominal modifiers and how these are treated in UD. So a definition of attributive adjectives is slightly modified from Hasselblad 2010. Within a noun phrase, an adjective is an lexeme that denotes a descriptive property and is used to narrow the reference of the nominal head. In UD, the syntactic relations that comes closest to our comparative concept is called a mod, which in principle is dedicated to adnominal attributive adjectives, but actually parsers treat other stuff as a mods as well. So these could be adverbs and gerundial verbs, and even sometimes of phrases. So additionally, we implement a set of filters, which for one of the filters we're going to look at later, that selects only adjectives by restricting the a mod relation to having a dependent with a POS tag of adjective. So relative clauses are clauses that are used to narrow down the reference of the nominal head. This is a comparative concept based on Comrie and Kutiva 2013. And UD has a syntactic relation called ACL, which captures all finite and non-finite clauses that modify a nominal, but it also has this subtype, which I can't really pronounce, so I keep saying rekel, akkel, rekel, which specifies that for many of these languages, that they have a subtype of the akkel relation, which is the relative clause specific modifier. And so most of the languages have this akkel, rekel UD relation, only Spanish and German do not, and we'll come back to the implication for our analysis of this difference later. Then we come to determiners. So UD has a universal part of speech called that in capital letters, and a syntactic relation that in small letters that you can see on the slide. Since we do not believe in the universality of an adnominal modifier called determiner from a typological perspective, and since this category contains relevant typological word classes such as articles and demonstratives and quantifiers and personal pronouns, we basically try and split up UD that into more relevant comparative concepts that we want to investigate. And here we are focusing on articles and demonstratives. So we have two comparative concept definitions for those two on the slide. Yeah, so we filter out in one of our filters articles and demonstratives from the UD relation that. Then we come to adpositions. So we have another definition here, please, and the UD relation that captures adpositions is called case. Those of you that are familiar with UD might know that there's another UD feature that's also called case, and this has to do with morphological case marking. It's confusingly that these things are called the same thing, but here we are not looking at universal morphosyntactic features as such as UD uses them. So we are not looking at what we would traditionally call case marking. We are looking at adpositions, so freestanding lemmas, which typically have to do with indicating spatial relationships and their order with respect to the noun. So as should be clear by now, there isn't always a direct relationship between the comparative concepts of the adnominal dependence that we want to investigate and their analysis in the UD project. So we have to come up with a set of filters that would ideally help us, which we'll find out later. So the first filter is no filter, using the UD relations as basically raw data. The second one is the UPOS filter, where we take information from the universal parts of speech tagger to identify only heads and dependents with particular UPOS labels. So for the heads, we take only nouns. So we do not include pronouns or proper nouns. And we take modifiers which are prototypical adjectival modifiers. So we take lemmas with the part of speech tags for adjective. Then we create a third filter. This was only done for the determiners, where we look at, actually go kind of deep into the corpus analysis, and we generate a list of types to pull out only articles and demonstratives, according to our own knowledge, checking what the corpus puts out, but also checking with grammars. So these are our first results. Remember, high entropy means high variability, low entropy means low variability. And we can distinguish basically three patterns in this plot. There are entropies of basically 0, which indicate that there's no variability in head-dependent order for that language. For instance, in Dutch, we can see the little circle and the little plus indicate that there is no variability in the relationship between relative clause and noun and determiner and noun order. We can identify a set of entropies which are larger than 0, but they're not high. So they're in the 0.1 to 0.3 range. And we can identify high entropies, where these we observe for A mod in 3 languages, so French, Italian, and Spanish, all the way at the top of the plot. When we zoom into the results, which we don't really do here, we observe that for some of these mid-level entropies, they're caused by parsing mistakes. This is, for instance, true for the Spanish and Greek determiner noun entropies. Here is a short example where the Greek parser wrongly identifies a noun determiner relation. So under the determiner category in UD, pronouns can also be determiners. And here the pronoun afti, which is the second word in bold, is treated as the dependent of the noun skoli, which is the first word in bold here. And well, of course, we can see from the English clause, and those of you who know Greek, that the pronoun belongs to the next clause. So we have to deal with this noise. And this is what we can do with the first real filter when we take into account the part of speech of the various heads and dependents that we are identifying in the corpus. So heads are always nouns, no pronouns or proper nouns, and the dependents correspond with the UD relation they have entered in. So we exclude, for instance, pronouns and verbs from being adjectival modifiers. So the results are such that for determiner noun, we have entropies close to 0 for all languages, and it leaves a few patterns with non-zero entropy that we would like to look at further. So these are case or adpositions in Dutch, attributable adjectives for all languages, and relative clauses in German. So let's have a look at those. So all the languages that we have included in this study are prepositional. Nevertheless, some have a few postpositions, so it was relatively easy for us to identify German entlang and zufolge as postpositions from the corpus. And then there is Dutch. So Dutch is slightly weird. So we have seen that Dutch is the only language with an entropy value for adposition noun order, indicating significant variation. And this is in part due to constructions that's called the EHD postposition, where the pronoun replacers daar, and here. So now I'm going to manage my Dutch and my English at the same time. This is going to be chaos. And they precede appositions. So there's a sentence here from Harry Potter. I'm going to read out the English because I don't know if I can manage the Dutch. Harry knew nothing about the wizard prison, only that everyone who said anything about it always did it in the same frightened tone. So it's about this bit about it. So if you want to have a third person pronoun after a preposition in Dutch, you can't actually do that. So you can't literally say about it in Dutch. So you have to replace them with these words daar, or here. And when you do that, they have to be in front of the preposition. So you get these technical postposition patterns in Dutch. And this is what you recognize when you look at a corpus. So it's quite straightforward that Dutch is actually, prepositional, but this construction pops up in the corpus quite a lot and leads to these elevated entropy values. Right. We come to relative clauses. So as we said earlier, German and French differ from the rest of the languages in not having a devoted UD relation for relative clauses, as the other languages in our sample do. We think in German this leads to noise. So here you can see an example of a relative clause had recognized. This is a recognized sentence from the parser, but we think it's wrong. And I've noticed that we are completely running out of time. So I'm going to speed up a little bit and go to adjectives. So adjectives, we find high entropies for French, Italian, and Spanish, as you guys saw in the plot. And one thing that we want to say about this, to be very, very quickly, is that we are dealing here with different types of variation. So in Italian, French, and Spanish, there's actually some adjectives are in free variation, some adjectives take a fixed position, but this differs across the lexicon. And the type of variation that we find with respect to Dutch and English and Greek, for instance, which also have slightly elevated entropy values, is completely of a different nature, where we are dealing with information theoretic strategies into having postponed adjectives. We are really running out of time.
Okay, let's jump.
Let's jump, yeah. So discussion and conclusions. For this quite small study, we can say that most of the patterns in most of the languages are rigid. So relative clause order with the noun and determiner noun order show very little variability, and the Walls classification is basically sound. But there are also abnormal relationships regarding adpositions and adjectives where there is variation, and this variation is arguably also of different types. So we should stress that such variation can be investigated more fully using a token-based approach, and that this is something that we will do in the future. So from a methodological perspective, we really wanted to quickly go over the pros and the cons of universal dependencies for typology, but we have no time left, so this is just flashing, and we can come back to this. We want to
show a really nice picture of
show a very nice picture of elephants.
From a
So we asked the question, can token-based typology work? And of course, our answer to this is yes, it is already working. There have already been several successful applications of token-based typology. Some of the issues that we deal with is related to the choice of a parallel corpus rather than using tree banks. So we need, as has been clear from the presentation, we need various ways to clean up noise and to make sure that we are matching UD relations with relevant word classes. But we think it's worth it because then we, in the end, have a parallel perspective and we can compare languages more directly than we can using tree banks. That's it. Sorry for taking too much time.
Thank you so much for that really exciting talk. And we do have some time for questions. So I don't see any in the Q&A. Oh, there is a hand up. So I'm gonna go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm Paolo from Italy, and yes, really fascinating, this paper. I wonder if you consider the importance of applied linguistics, of language teaching, because my impression there is that in some cases you don't completely take into account all variations that can be taken into account by good descriptions, which is a major problem with typology. If typologists don't speak a certain language, they can only rely on books that that are not necessarily written in the best possible ways, because the older models also in descriptions tended to find a basic rule and build up exceptions. And in teaching languages, I have the other problem. I'm trying to display that we have regularities, which is exactly what we expect from typology. But in this case, I think sometimes you are driving the other way out typology. So you get some results and on the one side, and make me afraid on the other side, because I wonder if you faced this problem, or it's only me who had that. Because I base my research on FTG grammar, which is typological based grammar. But I find that rules can help in making regular descriptions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, there are rules, of course, and in so for some of these word order patterns, we observe very strict relationships, right? I mean, we find that you can't really put a determiner after the noun, for instance, in any of these languages that we're looking at. But on the other hand, there is variation, and this variation may not always, come to light from the grammar. That is, I mean, often grammars are actually, of course, based on textual descriptions of languages or native texts or elicitation. But these patterns are clearly there. I mean, we don't think that there's anything about our corpora that makes, that biases our results, or that makes us retrieve patterns which are not realistic. Does that answer your question? That's all I got.
Okay, unfortunately, I think we're going to have to transition to the next talk, but thank you both so much. And you can contact the authors over chat or an email as well, so we can continue this discussion.